So I've often said publicly, I wasn't here between 2015 and 2022. I came back at the beginning of this mayor's administration. I'd been in the Midwest working and didn't really have my finger on the pulse of what was going on in Seattle. I was hired by this mayor's office, just kind of plucked out of the nonprofit sector and dropped into the department because they thought that I could do something with it. 911 had been pulled out, we didn't have business supports, finance, HR, all the administrative functions you would need to set up a new department were not in place. And I knew something about running businesses. And then, the data science part, if you're gonna have a dual dispatch pilot, a different team of first responders, who would they be and what types of calls would they respond to? So that was my initial job. I often say I didn't take any time to learn about elected officials, really even how things worked. I just thought of it as, okay, I've got a problem here. I've got 900,000 calls and I don't have enough first responders to send. And so I started to check, around the country, who's doing these types of pilots, are there any trends, what do we know? And what I learned really quickly is that there's no blueprint, that some things are working some places and not others, and we don't know. And so that emboldened me to act, realizing that I'm not going to know until I have a basic philosophy, get folks in the field, and then again start this iterative process. Is it going well? So the first team of 6 responders is Sasha, is one of the 6. They are intended to go out to the higher needs behavioral health calls, and by that I mean substance use disorder, mental health crisis. Sometimes it's just somebody weeping on the street or somebody's in distress, something has happened. And this is meant to be the most sort of upskilled clinical type team being dispatched from 911. I didn't understand that my department was associated with the defund movement. I've said that often. I had no idea, actually. I thought that we had taken 911 out because there is a national recommendation to have an objective 911 center that can dispatch lots of teams. So I went up to police right away. I mean, week 1, I knew they had a co-response unit, which is an officer and a social worker. And I was just like, hey, I'm Amy. I'm here to do this thing. Tell me how it's going. And they were great to me. I often say that. I recognize looking back, they should have been irritated at the least and very frustrated, probably. But they were great to me. I think they knew that I was trying to help. And I said publicly the first time I presented to council that my key metric will be whether or not this is a good support for our officers. Can officers get to more high priority calls because I'm able to send these folks to low priority calls? And people, I think, were surprised that I said that. I didn't know who I was talking to when I presented the first time. But it's anchored in pragmatism. I don't think of this as an ideological conversation at all. I think of it as a practical question, right? And we got to talk about this with Tracy in the blog. If you just look at the call, what is being observed, what type of professionals might you send? And I want swifter dispatch. We probably need 12 different types of teams, right, to be able to go out to these 911 calls. And so this was the concept of it. So high acuity means if there's potential for violence or public safety concern that is higher, that should be the police co-response unit. You've got a social worker who's in a ballistic vest, who's very, very well trained, and goes out in the car with law enforcement. And I've been on a lot of those ride-alongs. And then on the other side is when there's a more acute medical need, right? So if I have someone with an open wound, if we think we know that it's an overdose, then we need Health 99 to go out, we need fire to go out. And I want to be here in this middle space, which is consent-based intervention. So I always say we're not going to do any enforcement. We're not going to be remanding people to any kind of treatment. My folks are not even to move you away. We can invite you. In Albuquerque, they've scaled the team to the biggest. They've got 138 right now of folks like Sasha. And my colleague there, Mariella, she says, even when if there's an unsanctioned encampment that needs to be moved, they will go out, they'll warn people, they'll tell people like, hey, this is going to happen on Saturday, and we're happy to connect you to services. But once there's an enforcement needed, that's going to be police. This is the stated mission, which was really developed by the mayor's office for the department. It is intended to be a third public safety department, which in 20 years should look something like fire. By the data, we could respond to about half the calls, if we were to scale up and staff that way. We do not need fewer police. We need many, 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 many more police. So I think people don't understand, even with staffing, we never had adequate staffing in Seattle Police, not by any stretch. So I'm quick to say that, and I'm very much an endorser of Health 1 and Health 99 on the fire side. We need a lot more of that. I think most people understand the fire department doesn't do a lot of fires anymore. It is largely medical. And the fires that we are responding to often are warming fires right now that have gotten out of hand. The mayor has announced publicly a few times that he's going to put an Office of Violence Prevention in my department. People ask me what that means. I don't know. He says things, and I support it, but I don't. He has stuff in his head, and I do not know. But that's fine. It does make sense, and I've said publicly, to just kind of flatten and simplify our response, because we've got all these functions all over the city, and I can coordinate the work, but man, it's hard. I am in so many meetings because there's so many adjacencies, Department of Neighborhoods, Human Service Department, even the libraries have crisis workers, right, transit. So it's just a lot of work for me to run around trying to figure out who's doing what and make sure that we are using a coordinated philosophy and language. My contribution to this was compassionate. You like that? Okay. This is ethos. I didn't make this slide, but this is intended, I think, to reflect how I talk and think about things. So again, really data-driven. And then the second bullet is important. Frontline workers, they do tend to understand the problems the best and the solutions the best. So in 911, it's just fascinating because I'm trying to flip the whole culture upside down. It's been a hierarchical culture, right, where if I'm the youngest, newest call taker and I challenge something or ask a question, that's been insubordinate. And I'm trying to say, no, I prize that, I value that behavior. I don't trust people who want to debate with me. I really don't, because this work is so complex and subjective, and I need a lot of thinking around it. So this part is fun. And this is what my doctoral work focused on this. I partnered with the military to look at, how do you, in a military organization, still foster learning and a learning culture. The interagency relationships are really important. I do spend a ton of time with community-based organizations. Again, trying to be in the space, at Evergreen Treatment, what is going on, at the Morrison, what is actually happening here. And really ask the questions, try to understand corollary factors or causal factors for all these 911 calls or all this crisis, what's going on. I've told this story this week when I was at the Morrison. I continued to ask, okay, but on the nonprofit side, just philanthropy, what could we provide? What would help you? Because that's the sector I'm from, and that's how I think. And the man, Stephen, who runs that site, he's been there for 10 years, he said, Amy, it may sound silly, but food. We need food. And I said, food? And then I was thinking about that neighborhood and thinking, oh boy, even if I had money, I don't know where you get food anywhere in this neighborhood. And that is a major factor. And Barb Biondo, one of the crime prevention coordinators, said, don't you have a relationship with Fair Start? And he said, no, not anymore. And then he kind of made the joke, if you want to think about being either angry and violent, or sad and despondent, being hungry does not help, right? And so I actually find those conversations really encouraging because that I can solve, right? That is pretty simple and straightforward. I also learned they don't have activities there. They don't have an activities director. And so I've got 190 folks with the most complex diagnoses. They're all together in the Morrison without anything to do and without adequate food. So back to systems thinking, you will get the results you get with those circumstances. PSAC is the acronym that's used for these call centers for 911. Ours is the biggest, and we got a lot of calls. We'll hit 1 million calls, I'm sure, this year. It's interesting because we have a non-emergency line, then we've got the emergency line, and people often guess wrong. So about 30% of the calls that come into non-emergency, we would consider those an emergency, actually. And again, I just find this fascinating because emergency, that's really subjective, isn't it? People like me, I don't think anything's an emergency. I will probably bleed out. don't be alarmed. I don't think that I'm going to be fine, you know, and again, that's a lot to do with who I am and what my background is. And so when I'm in community, what I'm telling people generally is just call 911. Call 911. We'll divert the call. You know, if this should be an online form or if it should be 988 or something else, we'll let you know, but it is fine to call. We have had staffing shortages, but we're doing fine. You know, I think that's a fear people are still holding that's not valid today. You know, we will take your call. The first responders, that's really important to me. This center has been treated, and this is a national issue, we treat it like customer service. It's been thought of like, I've made the joke, it's like calling T-Mobile about my bill. It's not bad. It is hard, highly skilled work, and it is emotionally exhausting. When I sit and actually listen to calls, I think the aspect people don't think about is there's no closure, none. You know, so you sometimes are staying with someone in the worst moments of their life, again, guessing right, trying to guess right, dispatching the proper response we hope, but then there's no mechanism that they know what happened. And that is specifically and uniquely challenging. Other first responders, generally, you at least have that, you can follow up. So this is Sasha, you're in the middle. Very cute, yeah, that's a cool, this is a new photo, yeah. So that's what the vehicle looks like. One funny thing is I don't like to spend money. I definitely feel like taxpayer dollars are taxpayer dollars and I need to use them really, really well, and they belong to the community. So the city kept trying to give me new things and I wouldn't have them. So this is an old police vehicle that was repurposed. I've also got a fire vehicle that was repurposed. And we are shifting out of the municipal tower right next to police headquarters. So there's a ground level suite so we can go right out to the cars. That is Kat, who's not in uniform, is the care team manager. And she came over from dispatch. She has an MSW. She is doing a brilliant job. Really good leader because she's got a good line of sight into the system already and who's out there. And then this is just kind of a snapshot of the pilot, 11 to 11. I try not to focus on call types because they actually just don't matter. You know, we get really tripped up on this. The way we actually dispatch is just based on the narrative, on what we're hearing. And again, often that narrative is coming from someone who may or may not understand what they're seeing, right? You've just got somebody seeing something, trying to describe it. So what I'm really interested in is what did it turn out to be, right? People think this is a domestic violence situation. What was it actually? And then we look at that data, and that's what needs to inform the design, what police determined it was and what we determined it was. The budget is just under $2.4 million. There's some other grants and things being awarded. The mayor did just announce in his State of the City that the team would expand this year. I think he said to 24. Again, I did not know that. So I will find out exactly how that is going to go. But the question I usually get from other districts and neighborhoods, and actually I was at South Precinct roll call this week, and they said, when are you coming here? And I said, soon, soon, because what I would like to do is just identify in every district where is sort of the nexus of crisis and crime, you know, where is it the most intense, and I would rather just staff accordingly, according to the data. Okay, I did it. How was that, like 10 minutes? That was, yeah. A lot of words.
No, 7 minutes.
And was it really? Oh, okay, I was like, that's too fast, did I get it in 7? I always talk fast, but yeah, that would be too fast.
No, very well done.
Okay, so nows, and I often say, like, you can't offend me, I do like the questions. In roll call, several times I've been asked if I have a lot of brothers, I do, and I think it's a compliment that folks are asking me that. So, thoughts, feelings, questions? Yes.
I started with Seattle Police Department in 1985.
Oh, wow.
South Precinct.
Okay.
I don't know if you still call them this, but 220s. When we received a 220, I'm sure you know what a 220 is. That was a mental issue. Ended up in a fight almost every time.
Yeah.
Had we had something like this back then, we wouldn't have had that.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Or to a lesser degree, certainly.
Yeah.
When I completed my service, it was 2005, I was in homicide. I saw the results of a lot of that.
Yeah.
That turned to the extreme violence.
Yeah.
So this is great.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I've appreciated Chief Diaz recently talking about, initially when we presented together, he'd say, yeah, we have staffing shortages, it's good somebody else can go out. Lately, I heard him reflect consistently that even if we had all the police in the world, this is a different discipline. These are different professions, and you can only upskill so much, right? If I'm choosing to go into social work, that is a choice I am making, and it is an area that demands real expertise. One of the cool things about this, the co-response model where you have social workers out with people, I've learned, is that it's a great well-being support for officers. And I've been on co-response ride-alongs in different cities and heard that every time. It was cool to ride around with a social worker. And I never thought about that part of it. But my whole career I've worked around social workers, and it did change me. It gave me a lot of skills. They would tell me I'm talking too fast right now. But, I think how to design for this type of triage in the field is interesting. Because clinical therapists, social workers, you're trained often to not react quickly, to create space for someone, to guide a conversation, to ask questions. And this is the opposite, right? It's rapid assessment, and you have to be so improvisational, which I think is interesting. So nationally, I'm talking to a couple of different professors who are starting to study who does this well. I can tell you, a lot of folks know Sasha in Seattle. She was part of a King County crisis team before. But part of what makes her good when I watch her is that she's really culturally competent. She's fearless. She's not scared of people. And she feels safe. And all these things that would be hard to put in a job description, right? Just smiling at me. Very good. Yes. Yeah. But thank you for the comment. Yeah, I appreciate it. All right, what else? Yes.
First, will you run for president?
I made the joke that I will never, like the day I like politics, I am retiring. I think I'm effective because I don't care for it. So, yes. But thank you.
We just use someone a little bit there.
There you go.
But second, I know at the end of your talk you said something about somebody had called and when you were going to be in that area. When can we expect something in Cares North Seattle?
Well, I will say if I can take the mayor at face value, if it is, a fourfold expansion this year, it would be as soon as the next team comes, we're months out. We have to, just by the crisis data. There's so many hot spots. And also when I look at some of the complexity of South and Southwest, in my opinion, is juvenile crime. There are different circumstances down here. There are more, I watch all the time the priority 1 calls, threat to life. There's such and Chief Barton could speak to this better than I. But it's so important to me that I free those officers up to respond. And also the juvenile question it really demands mental health. It demands a co-response, in my opinion, because you do have a lot of vulnerability when you've got kids, especially committing crimes against other kids. So you're up next, I will say it that way.
Great.
Yeah.
Because I just recognize that a lot of the issues that we're having in the junction are people who, if they did have intervention and help, might not go into the violent side that they do, because they're right on the edge, a lot of them, and then they're out of it, you can see it, and then they commit a crime.
Yeah.
And I think this could go a long ways in terms of prevention.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had a meeting today with the folks from LEAD and REACH, and I met with We Deliver Care, a lot of the different outreach teams who are out there. And what I'm trying to encourage people to do is to speak with more candor about these gaps. And I often say publicly, we will not have outcomes the way you're talking about it. We're not going to have outcomes. I don't have a system. With juvenile justice, there's not a mechanism actually for police to even police that, generally speaking. And I think that's what some of the recent crimes have demonstrated. And again, Chief Barton could speak to this more eloquently. But it was interesting to hear their consensus that, that we do need a carceral system. We need it to be rehabilitative for sure. People understand we don't really use involuntary treatment, and we're all hesitant about that because even if we do refer someone to treatment involuntarily, it's not adequate. It's not adequate. It'll be a 3-day hold or maybe 14 days, and that does not do anything. I will be the first to say, I often talk about how long it takes just to change a habit, and that's if you're really healthy and privileged and resourced, it's hard. It's hard to change, you know, and so we have to base our policy in what we know. These are basic understanding. I talk about motivation theory all the time. You can't strip away deterrence and have no incentives and get that result. That's just not how the brain works, she said with a smile. So, yeah, but thank you for the comments.
So is the concept to try and do a reset? So if something is happening
Yeah,
and it's escalating, but
Yeah.
it's not high risk on the two sides. So you're here, is it just to talk it down, to de-escalate, to have them start problem solving, or find someone to help them feel safe?
yeah.
Not to
It's-
be
it's-
alone, is
yeah.
that the strategy? Because you're not gonna send them someplace, but you.
We're not going to remand them to someplace, but about a third of the time we do transport. So what's really interesting, every week I look at the detail of the calls. Every call my team goes out on, we do a little post-call survey, but I'm looking at what actually happened, and the variety is wild, actually. Last week, so I looked at 17 different calls, and they were actually 11 different types of issues, meaning in the call data, different issues. I think only one was a person down, which is the call we talk about all the time. I've used the example, and I think I did with Tracy, I can't remember, but one of the more interesting occasions for me was learning about this woman who had been evicted from permanent supportive housing. She had been there for 30 years. I think her husband died. Her husband died. She was elderly. She did not have the life skills to navigate that moment. Grief-stricken. Those of us who know something about grief, again, understand the impact on our ability to reason and strategize. She's evicted. Police were there. They called in the care team because this woman is outside this building. It's going to be 26 degrees that night with all of her things, and she won't move. And she's absolutely devastated. Now, this one for me was so interesting because it was, were you there? It was
Abdi and
Abdi and Chris were there. Yeah, Chris used to be a CSO, and Abdi, they're all just really gifted people. Abdi is Somali and has a bright smile and I think a very charming accent. He's interesting to listen to. Yeah. But they worked with her for about 3 hours, helping her to negotiate. They knew they could get her into shelter. There was no reason they couldn't. But she wouldn't leave her things, and so they had to navigate that conversation. What do you need tonight to be okay? And the thing actually brought me to tears when I read about it, even though it was like a clinical summary, because he kept saying, let's just take one more step. And she, as they're moving her through this grief process away from her things, that's what the community doesn't understand, is that I'm 3 months in, story after story after story. And so then I start to feel defensive that I don't know that this woman would have had anything diagnosable. She was grief-stricken. She lost her person, and then things. And that happens a lot right now. And I know I'm in a lot of housing conversations, and I think folks don't understand these issues very well. That it's not true that people overwhelmingly don't want housing. That is not true. It is true that the addicted brain will feed that addiction to the exclusion of everything else. And it is also true that if I've already lost everything, if I've lost my family and my job and my future and my health, I don't want to face that reality. This is basic, think about it. And this is in part, the kind of the psychology of addiction, why I need to stay high, because it detaches me from it, and I don't want to come back. And so that's something I do talk about almost every day, that nuance. We know we need to get people indoors. We know we want people into treatment. We know, like with fentanyl, we need medically supported treatment, but we also know that we need to engage people in their own recovery. And that's where it gets tricky.
Do you have somebody DoorDash some food to you? Seriously,
That's
in your hours,
Yeah.
something to drink, something to eat.
Yes,
You have snacks in your vehicle?
We do, yeah. In fact, Sasha's it's funny how you start to see people's natural sort of talents and leanings. Sasha is my soul sister in that she organizes and alphabetizes and categorizes everything. It looks like a Costco. Honestly, yeah, it's very nice.
An organized
An organized Costco. Yeah, so what we are able to do, again, we have a decent budget allocation. So as we start to realize a need, it's like, we need more baby stuff. We need baby seats, we need formulas, we need feminine hygiene. We knew we needed Narcan because everyone does, but that's what we're trying to do, is just watch what the trend is. And then I'm telling every other outreach team, just come to us, I'll be your clearinghouse. Because they don't have the resources and they need the same things to distribute that we have. So, yeah, we do have food though.
I think it's great what you guys are doing, and honestly, to see the city of Seattle taking the leading edge and, you know, dividing the law enforcement gap between the care side of things, where, you know, you need to have the psychology perspective and training and advanced training to be able to deal with dynamic situations. It's great to see that. We provide security to the West Seattle Junction and the Bound Business Alliance.
Oh, wow.
So there's a few things that we see from time to time. You know, the police thing that you mentioned about them being completely, you know, understaffed, we need a ton more police, it's completely accurate. We would like to see, you know, more police officers out in the communities and like that.
Yeah.
It would definitely help. But one thing we've noticed is a lot of companies like ours even, it's, you know, we got something going on, we have an individual who's immobile, or he's on the ground, and he's refusing medical, he's refusing assistance and everything. It's really sad to see somebody overly addicted, refusing assistance. But in situations like that, is that stuff we can still call for you guys, even though they're refusing assistance, or?
Yeah, you can call 911. And again, people often ask, can they directly request the team? Our protocols naturally would indicate that we would send that team based on what you're describing if they're available. The challenge is just our staffing too, and whether or not we're out. The CSOs are an excellent resource. You know, that's another thing that I worked really hard on the end of last year, is making sure that that role is well defined and that we're coordinating. Because what I arrived at was everyone working the same hours basically. So I've got CSOs, I've got Health One, I've got Police Car Response, but everybody basically was working like banker hours mostly. And the reason for that is because there aren't resources after hours, and so you can't really take anyone any place anyway. So I do think of us, I mean, there's a reason I know them. I think of us as one team, and I'm always saying there's enough work to go around. We just need to organize ourselves and figure out who do we call first, and then who do we call second, if not available. But yeah, thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, of course, and you know, one of the other things you kind of run into is individuals not really having a place to go. A lot of these, the businesses and the BIAs, their mom and pop shops and stuff, the last thing they want is a huge mess, drug paraphernalia in front of their business when they go in the morning and stuff. And one thing we've kind of run across is these people, most of the time, do want to comply, and they don't want to be in people's way. But they got nowhere to go. Are you guys in works of figuring out an area, designated areas for individuals, or?
I knew coming into this calendar year, there are two issues where I'm coming in hot, and that's one of them. We have no place to take people. And I've shared often, I used to say, we need places to go besides the emergency department and jail. I don't say that. I don't have those places either. There's no place indoors. When I was at Evergreen Treatment, I shared this story to a council committee, because I had just been there, that there was somebody at the door and I thought it was for security. It's not, it's just crowd control. In Belltown, there's almost no place you can go to use a bathroom or to get warm. And that is, Third Avenue. Like, we understand how many people are there. I've heard Chief Barden say, with a lot of decorum and dignity to the mayor's office, where would you like me to take people? Where would you, I understand you don't want to see this, where shall we go? And so, and when I say indoors, I think it needs to look like a lot of different things. I personally am really liking the tiny house villages, because it just looks by the data like that is a good solution, where you can sort of design, is this group being supported out of addiction and into recovery? Is this a group of families? Is this, that you can have a little more flexibility in design? And again, the financials, I'm going to keep making the case that we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to prolong suffering. We are. We see it in 911. We see the same overdose death. And it is devastating to actually see that, to know that it's avoidable. The best part of my job is feeling how much people actually care. I was at the Soto 10-year party, and the day before, somebody had been hit in traffic and killed. And 4 different strangers came up to make sure that I knew about this. What troubled people so much was it was somebody chronically in crisis who would walk around with like a blanket over their head. And 911 was called many times, we'd get the person off the street, but everybody knew that this person is going to die. And again, what I find very inspiring is nobody could tell me anything about this person in this case, but people felt grief over that unnecessary death. And that I live for. You know, when I'm with the business community, especially sort of the fancier, larger business community, it's very encouraging to hear people remind me, yeah, there's economic impact, yeah, it's bad, we're worried about our business, but people are dying in our stairwells. That's what we're worried about. And so that is why I don't have a lot of, that's why I'm not political. You know, I'm not really interested in being in City Hall, although it's a lovely building. I'm interested in trying things. And generally when you see change, either on the crime side or the crisis side, it's because a person invested long enough to realize what is going on, what are the causal factors here, how can we help? And, you know, people, it's interesting the role of outreach, because it's hard to monetize it, to say, oh, you know, this intervention gets these outcomes, but we all know that if I'm in crisis, I've given up on myself, I have no one, the mere fact that the same person would come back and back and back and continue to care if I was dead or alive is so significant. And I think that's the complexity. It's hard for me to put that in a white paper, but I know that it's true, and Sasha knows that it's true. And I talk to people all the time who have recovered from addiction. The first time I talked to someone who had recovered from fentanyl addiction, which again is pretty rare, but it's always the same story. There's always an intervention, and sometimes it looks more like a family intervention. You are going to treatment, and sometimes it has been carceral for people, but there has to be a disruption in this spiral. And the urgency I feel around fentanyl is that medical doctors uniformly are telling me people will not live. I used to say 3 years, I'm hearing 2. They will not live with this addiction for 2 years. And so, you know, we have to dwell there, that we can't treat it the same as we would treat other types of addiction. We do need to act with more urgency. I was just talking to the Portland folks this week, and Mike Myers is the Amy-ish person there, and he said, Amy, we're treating it just like we treated COVID now. You know, we've declared a state of emergency. They have set up like mission command, and it's police and their community safety unit and fire, their outreach teams. And you know, I was asking about different policies and restrictions, and he said, no, we can actually just step around it right now. That's what this declaration did for us. And it'll be interesting to see if it works. San Francisco's doing the same thing. Los Angeles is doing the same thing. Enough. We have to get folks indoors. So I just depressed myself. Somebody asked a hopeful question.
Because you mentioned adequate staffing for both the care team and this department. What's the difference between the current staffing and what adequate staffing is?
Yeah. Well, I would say for police, we need like at least 400 more sworn officers. I mean, and again, Eric nods, yes. I would say for care, again, if I was just going to analyze how many calls come in and what is required, yeah, it'd be like probably at least 240 folks. I mean, it really would. But even then, I'm always quick to say, I'm in the triage business, right? This is first response from 911. And if we want to see change in our communities, what happens next? And I am not a believer that the city is supposed to pay for all the ongoing treatment and case management, and I don't think that's a good design. You just have a huge, huge government if you did it that way, and you lose efficacy. I come from the nonprofit sector. I believe in that model. When I was working in foster care, I was at Amara. Our job was to get kids out of care and into permanency. That was the job. Either reunified or in a kidship placement or adopted. And I worked very closely with Treehouse. It was their job to support kids while they were in care. That was where they fit. What do you need while you're here in this process? And then Partners for Our Children and Mockingbird Society, we all knew where we fit. We worked together and we were excellent. And so that is the model that I prefer when it comes to these complex issues. You don't want to be a mile wide and an inch deep. You know, so I want to get great at first response. What do you need? What does it seem like you need? I want to dispatch it. And I talked to John Ehrenfeld. He does Health 1, Health 99. He's a great design thinker. And I said, just know, there's a world where I want to be able to dispatch these teams. And he said, got it. Because there's no reason not to. If I know it's an overdose, send that team, right? But just as a human and as someone who really, really cares, my brain doesn't let me stop there, at that initial response. I want to know that somebody's going to have a chance.
What's the process for determining whether or not it's safe to send your team out versus an armed police officer? And what's the data
Yeah.
on when they made the wrong decision?
Yeah. So in dispatch, there have been protocols for a really long time. When would we send the CSOs? When do police call in another team? There's a series of questions that are asked, and it's a pretty basic logic model. Do you see this? Do you observe this? What about this? What about this? The pilot is called dual dispatch because I'm on police channels, and police can go out. They can go at the same time, and sometimes they do. It's funny, I'm the one that's been requesting it because I think that I think it's a better design to start a little bit more skeptical and more cautious, and then let the data prove that police were never needed. They were never needed. These are priority 3 calls are supposed to be safe. If we're just getting that right, priority 1 is supposed to be threat to life, urgent threat to life, gotta go, someone could die. That's what it's supposed to be. We've kind of crept away from that, and Chief Barton and I are working on pulling that back. 2 also is supposed to be an emergency. An emergency, lights and sirens, you've got to go. Priority 3 shouldn't be. It should be that somebody deserves a response, but it might be an 8-minute response versus, a 2-minute response. Yeah. So far, I can tell you, we've been to more than 300 calls. I think about 320 calls, and police have never been called back. Sometimes they've been there and left. Sometimes they hear us and they say, care team, take it, because it's a high utilizer. You'd be surprised how few people, it's Pareto principle. We've got, what was the statistic today? Half the crime is happening in 4% of the streets in Seattle. And crisis is the same way. I've got high utilizers. I've got folks where one individual, there's a crisis call 100 times a year. So we know who that is, and we know the people who are never violent. They're just in crisis.
So is it the 911 operator that's making this?
It's 911, yeah, and that is still, I talk about this other stuff a lot, but 80% of my focus at least is 911. Because if I can transform and improve that system, everyone's going to be so much better off.
Unlike our domestic disputes, I've heard that that's a dangerous situation for an officer.
Yeah, there's all different call types about domestic disputes and domestic violence, and again, we've erred a little bit too far away from the data where we think if a man and a woman are arguing, it's probably domestic, they're probably partners, and he could kill her. And that's how I'm dispatching, and that's just not, it's just not appropriate because the data doesn't bear out that you need to be that cautious. There are things that indicate to us, and this is where content analysis gets really interesting, research gets interesting. You can predict when it could turn violent. And so, we're in a meeting today once a month at headquarters, police headquarters. We have just a crime statistics meeting, basically, where we're looking at the trends, but you also have all the people in the room that could actually inform a better response or innovation. So, the city attorney, the prosecutor, state's attorney, I'm there. The medical examiner spoke today. So we can look at these hot spots. And we can predict what calls will come in from where. We talk about 12th and Jackson every day. I talk about 3rd and Pine every day. And for crisis too. Again, I went to the Morrison early because I know, of course, a quarter of these calls are going to be crisis calls because these are the diagnoses. And when you co-locate folks with those diagnoses, you're going to get a result. So, yeah. So far, we've called police back 3 times only for referrals. Navigation Center, right?
Or, no, CSC.
Crisis Solution Center, yeah.
What about trespassing?
Yeah, we haven't done that, but we could. When we've done it, it's because police have gone out and then they've realized, again, somebody has wandered over. Often somebody is under the influence, they need help, but they're not in any kind of violent state, you need resources. So the programs that have scaled, like Albuquerque I talk about, there are 36 different types of calls they consistently respond to. But the way that I think about it is a lot more simple. I just think, does it need a gun and a badge, or does it need fire? Is this a medical emergency? And if it's not that, I should be able to send out a skilled team that's somebody appropriate to that call. the other thing to think about is these responses, police and fire, that is expensive. That is expensive, and again, it's scarce. With police, I need to be very thoughtful to not send out 2 officers if they're not needed. You know, that's not appropriate, and it's not good for morale either. They want to do the work they're trained to do. I think it's probably, I haven't done this analysis yet, but I bet my team, I think it's probably about 20 cents on the dollar, you know, what it actually costs to deploy the team. So, you know, I never think economics is the reason to do the right thing, but it certainly should motivate us, again, to scale whatever the most financially conservative, prudent approach is. So, and again, council, I'm really happy working with this council because I can tell they're concerned about the spending. You know, you should spend if you're going to get the outcome you want. So.
And how do you assess the situation? You go out with you get out of the car and start looking around.
Yeah, well, we had a really month-long training of situational awareness and how to safely assess. And so, as Amy mentioned, there's sometimes our officers on scene. So, and then we always kind of, when we approach in our car, we look around, look at our environment, and then, you know, for the most times, at least for myself, I am able to kind of gauge. So my first thought is like, are there any weapons? Are they in behavioral control? Because usually, in my experience, and I've been doing this kind of crisis intervention for like 7 years, if they're at a low or kind of at a baseline, for themselves, they usually will stay there if there's not another reason for them to get escalated. And that's why I like doing this work, because my point to be there is not to escalate them. But assessing kind of who else is around too is a really big thing, because if there's another person that could potentially escalate this individual, this community member that I'm helping, that's going to be a concern for me. What other situations? Like just, you know, again, situational, environmental, people, paraphernalia is a huge one. We do carry sharps, containers, and gloves if we need to make sure that we're safe, so we're not stepping on used needles and syringes.
So you have to trust your gut feel sometimes too.
Kind of have to.
Yeah. Again, our brains are good at that.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting in 911, one of the things I realized is that career professionals, they said like, oh, we know when people are lying. And I was like, you do? See, why would anyone lie? But, you know, they do sometimes. And again, it's more that cognitive. It's like in the background, we're sort of triangulating. This is usually how a person would describe this, or this is a degree of panic or. So, you know, I think for these types of crisis responders, it's the same thing. I have been in lots of vulnerable situations in my career on the front lines. I mean, even as a dependency court CASA, I think folks don't understand how much training we get about situational awareness and how trained you are to not proceed, you know, to go back. And obviously fire and police have been working this way forever, right? Fire call for law enforcement backup all the time. They think it's going to be safe and then they realize it might not be. So it's interesting, the actual work, what we do a lot of is just, what do you need? What do you need? You know, how can I help? We've got cigarettes, sometimes it's like muffins. I saw we did one transport to get like a Slurpee.
Yeah, that was me.
Transport, yeah.
Well, wasn't it? It was a field trip.
It was a field trip, Slurpee field trip,
Yeah,
yeah. But you're trying to help somebody, you know, it's a cup of coffee, you're trying to help somebody get into a different space, a mental shift, so that they can have it. Barton, that's you, One of the jokes in the city is that officers will, if somebody's crying or muttering, they'll be like, that care team, that's you. Yes.
Do you have a method to call for help real quick if you need it?
I'm sorry?
Do you have like a panic button or something to call for help?
So we do, however, I am like, myself and our team have built enough and a lot of respect and trust within each other, so we feel the need that officers should come back to support us and need to come back to support us for our safety and the safety of our community.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll call them back right away. And same goes for them. If they say, this is not a safe scene for y'all to be in, we're out.
Yeah.
We trust each other on that.
I was really careful with, part of the job initially was to talk to SWAT, to talk to all these different unions that I was impacting, had not been conferred with, which I found really problematic. But I was really careful to make sure that the police associated unions and members understood we will be deferential too. This has been your body of work. We are talking about, they are tasked to be the guardians of community and don't want anything to go wrong. And so I think, again, in the public, I think it gets misconstrued a lot. In fact, Chief Barton and I joked one day because somebody in the press, or it was just some commenter, had said, police are gatekeeping her, meaning me. And he's like, Chief Maxey, they're like, she gatekeeps us. She's not being gatekept, but it just was never true. It was never true that it was not a collaborative conversation. And it was always my assertion that this has been your body of work, and that we do go out in primary response, but I still feel like in the space of safety, I'm going to be deferential to this unit. And in the space of medical triage, I'm going to be deferential to fire. And they're actually very deferential to us when it comes to, again, the behavioral health stuff in the middle. And the other thing that's cool that's happening organically is we're just all texting one another. These teams know each other and confer with one another. I see when I go out on ride-alongs with the medic side, they'll call and We Deliver Care and other outreach teams and say, hey, have you seen so-and-so? And so it's cool because that's the only way the work gets done. If you go to some of these corners, you see all these teams represented. And I think they get frustrated because it's like, while there's all the politicians and all the things going on, we're out here doing the work together and we're fine. We like working together. It's not a divisive environment. So, yeah.
I know this is not your expertise, but is 988 up and running?
It kind of is my expertise, actually. I had been in mental health provision for a long time. I was excited. I was living in Cincinnati when that was announced. And then the rollout wasn't good. That's what I would say. I mean, everybody knows that. So people thought it would be more like 911, where there would be a lot of articulation about protocol. What they did instead was, at a federal level, decide, okay, every state can figure out who the providers are, and you can partner. And I think it was fast-tracked to the extent that some really basic questions were not asked or answered. One is, we all have cell phones now. And so what happened effectively is if I call from a 917 number called 988 in Seattle, I'm going to be connected to someone in New York. This is, again, it's kind of astonishing they didn't think about that, but that's not good in mental health. We want to be able to connect you to services in your community. I know, it's funny/sad. So that was problematic. I always endorse it in Washington State because I know the providers. Crisis Connections is doing Seattle's provision, Volunteers of America. They're doing a really good job. But we've got there's all these committees. I'm part of some of them, crisis response improvement strategies, because we know they're just not integrated. And we need to get to a world where 988 is a mile away from West Precinct where 911 is, but there's not a mechanism where we can divert back and forth easily, and there needs to be. 988 is good if you can be kept on the phone and get through a dark night. That is the role of 988, and there are a lot of people who fall in that category. I am often the person on the phone for somebody's dark night, right, in my family, so it's people who don't have that level of support that need to be heard. They do a good job of connecting people to services that are local. We just don't have enough services, Good question.
So thank you, and I want to be respectful of your time and really appreciate the presentation. There were two questions I did have for you. You said that the mayor is looking at doing a fourfold increase in care team?
Yeah, he has said 24, which makes sense because I was asked last year, how big can you imagine growing this team in the next 2 years? And I said 24. The reason for that, though, is my preference is to, again, identify what the CSOs are doing, what I can dispatch them to. Look at the unified care team. I've got all these different functions, and I'd rather organize that work before I just add more and more and more people. But he did say 24, so I imagine that's
Gotcha. And you had mentioned, I was thinking about this particular model, with the 3 primary responders. You said Albuquerque is doing something similar, or what other communities are doing what we're doing here? Because I think this is pretty unique.
Yeah, nobody is doing what we're doing specifically, meaning 911 is housed in this department and is the genesis for response, is the data hub. That is completely unique. It's a good design because what I've learned is there's about 75 pilots where you've got alternative responses to 911 calls, but generally, even if that team is stood up, if the dispatchers don't buy into it, they don't send it, right? And 911 often sits with police or is housed by police, and you are trained to be skeptical. It is a cynical environment. You're trained to think someone could have a gun. That could be a bomb. This could blow up. That's how they're trained. And so that's sort of antithetical to the spirit of what I'm doing. I can compel people to act, right? And so that's what people are paying attention to nationally. I do get a lot of calls because folks are realizing, oh, that's different. If you want a bunch of different responses, if I want to dispatch the CSOs, I should be able to do that, right? And get a much better result for community. Albuquerque is a third public safety department that is growing very similarly, right in between fire and police. And Mariella there has partnered really closely with the police chief. We've heard them present together. And that, I think, needs to become the national standard. That it's not this instead of this. It's that we are all together in a continuum of response across crime and crisis, and we do the work together.
Thank you. And final question, this violence prevention team thing?
Again, I've heard it's a thing. I've heard it's coming.
We heard rumors that we were gonna be part of it, and it's like,
Yeah, no, that's
okay,
not-
where'd that rumor come from?
Yeah, no. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. You know, I will say, I think philosophically, it's a little bit odd to put it in my department because I conceptualize myself as 911. So I can imagine like diversion right before 911 as things are, this is prevention, right? And then you've got early intervention, and then I think about myself like later stage intervention, right? Right before someone starts to bump up in the system. And then we've got hopefully rehabilitation and then reentry. That's sort of what the timeline would look like. I feel like, I will say this, I feel like prevention sits in as owned by community primarily. That is where it needs to sit. And those of us in that space, like yourself, we support community in identifying signs of trouble and responding and resourcing so that we don't get these intergenerational cycles. But, you know, it really does have to be community-driven design where folks have what they need. You know, in Little Saigon, that is an area of great focus for me right now because we're not investing enough in the community, in community leaders and community-based organizations that they can make things better and then continue to lead out. It's just different elected officials coming in and different EDs coming in and investing for a minute and then moving on. So, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
I'm sorry?
Thank you for the invitation.
Again, there are so many speaking engagements I'd like to be a part of, and hopefully we'll say yes to all of them.
I'm going to try to say different things in all of them, so that'll
Okay.
be okay.
So again, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So she's